So let's get started. Good morning, everybody, and I hope you're all well. As I told you last week, today we're going to take a break from the presidential election here.
Thank God.
Which I heard that, which still has no official winner. Hopefully, we might have one by next Monday when is the last class of our session, even though at this point it doesn't look that way. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens in the next week, and we'll turn our attention to a country with its own presidential election issues, which is Belarus.
Oh, terrible.
Their mass demonstrations have been held every Sunday since August 9, which was the day of the presidential election. And the last one was yesterday, a mass demonstration in the aftermath of the death of an opponent, a militant who had been in the custody of the police over there. With tens of thousands of people protesting against, again, allegedly rigged and most likely rigged elections, and asking once again for the resignation of the president there, Alexander Lukashenko, who's been in power now for 26 years and counting. As you also know, the latter has responded violently by using his police to beat up on peaceful demonstrators and by intimidating his political opponents, forcing some into exile and jailing others. But before trying to see what's going on in Belarus and why, let me bring you up to date on the recent developments in Nagorno-Karabakh, which actually happened to see last week or 2 weeks ago in the southern Caucasus. If you don't mind, Michel, putting up the first map. Unfortunately, I couldn't find an up-to-date map that gives you exactly where the military forces stand today, but I'll try to explain it on the map that we have. This is the Ukraine, this is Belarus. No, the other one, map number 1. Let me just say that first, the fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh is over. Last Monday, a Russian brokered ceasefire entered in force. Thank you, Michel. Now, I'll explain it to you as you see it on the map, because it's not, again, it's not up to date. It doesn't reflect the latest development. A Russian brokered ceasefire entered into force that sealed the military victory of Azerbaijan, that has retaken territory that belonged to it under international law, but had been de facto controlled by Armenia since the two countries' previous war in the 1990s. Now, Nagorno-Karabakh is in dark brown, proper Nagorno-Karabakh purple.
Right.
All the area in yellow surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh used to be areas controlled by the Armenian army. All this area was recaptured by Azerbaijan, including some parts of Nagorno-Karabakh. For instance, you see here the city of Shushi or Shusha in the south. That's a hilltop town, a place of historic and strategic significance to both countries, because Shusha overlooks the capital city of Nagorno-Karabakh, which is Stepanakert, which is nearby. So all this area was retaken by the Azerbaijani army, as well as you see here Lachin or Lakin. This is a corridor that cuts through Nagorno-Karabakh from one side of Armenia in the east to the other region of Armenia called the Autonomous Republic of Nakhichevan, which is down here. So and then it cuts also through an area of Armenia proper and goes into the other side of Azerbaijan. So this is also controlled today by the Azerbaijani army. For its part, if you can leave the map on. Okay, thank you. For its part, Azerbaijan retained control of some of the territory, including, as I said earlier, the city of Stepanakert, which is the capital of Nagorno of the province. Also, under the agreement, some 2,000 Russian peacekeepers were to be deployed. Actually, the deployment already started for at least 5 years to guard the line of contact between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces in the region, as well as a road connecting Armenia-controlled Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia proper, and also, as I said to you earlier, along the line of the Lachin corridor, linking the two sides of Azerbaijan through Armenian territory. But there are, despite all that, there are many unknowns for the time being. This ceasefire was signed only last Monday and was supposed to go into effect actually today. But the Azerbaijani side and the Armenian side came to an agreement to push it back to next Monday. Monday is the 23rd. There are many unknowns about the future of Nagorno-Karabakh, including the peacekeepers' precise role. For the time being, they were only deployed, but they have not been assigned any particular specific role besides to serve as a buffer between the two armies. And how soon Azerbaijanis will resettle the captured area. Now, as I told you the last time when we looked at Nagorno-Karabakh, the early 1990s war, which ended in 1994, displaced 1 million people from that area, most of them Azerbaijani, because at the time Azerbaijan was on the losing side of the war. And now those Azerbaijanis who fled to Azerbaijan proper are expected, obviously, to return to areas of Nagorno-Karabakh and the areas, all the villages surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh for which they had been chased. They are expected to return there, which are now under Azerbaijani control, chasing the Armenian population living there, a sort of ethnic cleansing in reverse, if you will. That was point number one. Second, the announcement that was made in the middle of the night in Yerevan triggered, needless to say, jubilation in Baku, which is, you can see on the map here, is the capital of Azerbaijan on the Caspian Sea. And anger and sorrow, obviously, in Yerevan, you can see it also on the map, the capital of Armenia. More than 2,300 Armenian soldiers died during the fighting since the outbreak of this war, which started on September 27. A relatively short but very brutal 6-week war. The loss of Armenian territory on Tuesday is already taking a place in the annals of tragedy in Armenian history, alongside with the slaughter and expulsion of Armenians from Turkey a century ago, and in what is commonly called today the century's first genocide, the 20th century first genocide. In Yerevan also, demonstrators furious that Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan had signed the agreement, stormed the parliament building and the Prime Minister residence, and opposition politicians are calling for Pashinyan's resignation. And third, while Azerbaijan has won on the battlefield, Michel, can you put up the map once again, please? While Azerbaijan has won on the battlefield, Russia and Turkey are the great winners politically. Russia's brokered deal has underscored President Putin's geopolitical influence in the region over two countries that used to be part of the former Soviet Union. And it is revealing in that regard that none of the other co-presidents of the so-called Minsk group, including France and the United States, which was supposedly dealing with the Nagorno-Karabakh issue as well, were invited to participate in the ceasefire process. While Putin has not come to the rescue of Armenia, much to the chagrin of Armenia, and the reason for it, it seems to be, number one, he had a score to settle with the Prime Minister of Armenia, Pashinyan, who in 2018 took over power in Yerevan by staging a coup about the former Prime Minister of Armenia, who was a very good friend, personal friend of Putin, and against the will of the Russian president. That's number one. And number two, as usual, there are economic interests. Azerbaijan, after all, when you say Baku, you say oil. There is a lot of oil. It's an oil-rich country, Azerbaijan is. So Russia saw its own interest in keeping on the good side of Azerbaijan. But at the same time, he was very careful, Putin, to deploy these Russian peacekeepers who, in a way, guarantee Armenia's control over some parts of Nagorno-Karabakh, and more importantly, the indivisibility of Armenia proper that was at some point threatened by a possible Azerbaijani invasion. Because the army of Azerbaijan had such superiority over Armenia's army that some of the Azerbaijani leaders called publicly not only for retaking Nagorno-Karabakh, but also for going into Armenia proper to punish the Armenians. As for the Turkish President Erdogan, who strongly supported Azerbaijan from the get-go, the combination of Azerbaijan victory, Russia's tacit accord. Why did Russia agree with Turkish inclusion there? Because it's very simple. Putin has been trying for years to get Turkey to move away from NATO. And as you know, he never hesitates to exploit any division between its member states. And also, Erdogan was emboldened by the passivity of the European Union member states, who usually put out statements but have not done really anything against Turkey. So now Turkey is in a great position in Central Asia and in Southern Caucasus. And also that gives him latitude to act freely and to continue his disruptive activities in Libya, in Syria, and in Eastern Mediterranean. By the way, you might have seen today that Erdogan went yesterday to Northern Cyprus, which is, I remind you, Cyprus is partitioned in two since 1974. 2/3 in the southern part of Cyprus are under Greek control, but 1/3 was invaded in 1974 by Turkey. And 37 years ago, that part of Cyprus declared independence that only Turkey recognizes today. However, Turkey maintains some 40,000 troops in northern Cyprus. And today or yesterday, Erdogan made a statement to the effect that he was going to open some resorts in Famagusta. Famagusta is a city in Cyprus, in northern Cyprus, which is almost on the green line separating the two Cypruses. And the United Nations, who has a mission in Cyprus, is worried that such a move might create, again, serious tensions between Greece and Turkey again, and Cyprus, because the southern part of Cyprus is recognized by the international communities. Cyprus has a seat at the United Nations, but the Greek controlled Cyprus, not the Turkish one. So again, we might have more friction between within NATO that doesn't need frictions anymore at this time. So this is where we stand today in Nagorno-Karabakh, to go back to Nagorno-Karabakh, and we'll have enough time to see how these things unfold, since we won't be meeting again until end of January. So we'll see what happens. So let's now go back to Belarus. Now, Michelle, if you can put up the Belarus map. Now, I remind you, when Belarusians took over the streets in the hundreds of thousands in August, as I said earlier.
Pierre, excuse me, did you want me to show the Belarus map right now?
Please.
You want the Belarus map? I'm sorry, every time I have to log off, it's because somebody needs help getting in.
No, I understand, Michelle. It's okay.
I can't share my screen and help people at the same time, so that's why
No, it's no big deal. Okay. You can wait.
It's not that I'm not paying attention, it's that I'm trying to help people get into the class. Okay.
Now, when Belarusians took to the streets in the hundreds of thousands in August, after Lukashenko claimed a re-election victory that was widely seen as fraudulent. Thank you, Michel. Many predicted that Lukashenko's days were numbered. But those predictions turned out to be premature. As impressive as these Sunday demonstrations might be, with again, people in 10,000s or hundreds of thousands of people in different cities of Belarus, the opposition, the political opposition in Belarus, lacks the strength to compel Lukashenko to step down or agree to new elections. His main rival, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, has fled to Lithuania, which is, you can see on the map, is next door. As a political novice, she only entered the campaign, the presidential campaign, only after the arrest of her husband, who was a declared candidate. Tikhanovskaya serves as a symbol of the protest, if you will, but lacks the skill to lead it. So, acknowledging the limitation of her role, she established a so-called coordination council, which was initially tasked with facilitating a peaceful transfer of power away from Lukashenko. Now, the government reacted immediately, proclaiming the council illegal and opening criminal cases against its members, most of whom are now under arrest or have fled the country. As a result, the body has provided little in the way of leadership, struggling to expand the grassroots opposition beyond its original base, which is mainly made up of young urban protesters. It has, for example, failed to convert support among workers at state-owned factories into a nationwide strike that could weaken a core Lukashenko constituency. This inability to galvanize support has already led the council to scale down somewhat its demands. Instead of calling for Lukashenko to step aside, it now speaks more vaguely about the need to reorganize the process of overcoming the political crisis and ensure social cohesion. For his part, Lukashenko is weaker than ever before. As a result of his systematic response to the demonstrators' protest, he arrested, beaten, and forced into exile many of them, and even made some of his political opponents disappear. His popularity hovers around 10%, according to a covered polling carried out recently by a non-governmental organization within Belarus. This little support he has left is in rural area mostly, and small towns, and among older generation of Belarusians. The government elite, including most of those in the security services, has also remained overwhelmingly loyal to Lukashenko because they know that their fate is linked to that of the president. However, Lukashenko has alienated ordinary citizens by calling the protesters rats and appearing alongside his teenage son wearing body armor and holding a rifle. Not exactly the image of a man of the people. He has unsuccessfully been trying to project. The name of last dictator of Europe suits him better. Most enduring leader in the former Soviet Union, with, as I said, 26 years of presidency under his belt, Lukashenko heads a regime that is less a party, one-party state than a one-person state. The former director of the Soviet collective pig farm, Lukashenko might seem today as a relic of a bygone era. That was not always the case, however. Most Belarusians still remember Lukashenko's first speech in the Belarus legislature in December 1993, where he denounced chaos and crooks, calling Belarusians hostages of an immoral and unprincipled system that manipulates and deceives the people. At his inauguration in 1994, his first term as president, he quoted Abraham Lincoln on democracy, while declaring that the end of anarchy has arrived, and told the senior American diplomat in Belarus at the time that he felt a kinship with President Clinton because of their shared humble origins. When he started, Lukashenko most likely believed what he said. And so did the people who elected him to replace the old communist system with democratic institutions, freedom of speech, and economic reforms. Lukashenko destroyed the previous system, all right, but replaced it with his personal one. Today, he is the system. After 26 years in power and 5 more elections, each one probably more rigged than the last, according to independent monitors, Lukashenko is still president. He makes his generals salute his teenage son, who shares his penchant for dressing in military uniforms, and tells Belarusians to play hockey, drive tractors, and not worry about the COVID-19 pandemic, which he says it's an invention of the human mind, particularly in the West. And he still presents himself as a tireless defender of little people. In February, he joked to Secretary Pompeo that, and I quote him, "Our dictatorship has a distinctive feature. Everyone gets some rest on Saturday and Sunday, but the president works." This show, however, is getting old. His winning 1994 slogan, which was "neither with the left nor with the right, but with the people," has been replaced by a new rallying cry from the street, chanting even by many of those who once saw Lukashenko as their savior, "Go away, go away." The course of events in Belarus, which, as you know, was a former Soviet republic of about 9.5 million, that you can see on the map, which is basically between Russia and Poland, could prove significant, and that's why we are looking at what's going on there. It might prove significant for the geopolitics of Europe. Belarus is Russia's closest ally, and Lukashenko naturally appeals to President Putin for security assistance, and he did so when the protests reached their height. Putin was primed to respond. The Russian leader views the revolutions that have overthrown Kremlin's friendly government elsewhere in the region as Western interferences in the Moscow's sphere of influence. And he made clear that he will do whatever it takes to ensure that Belarus, which Moscow views as a strategic buffer, as you can tell from the map, against its Western rivals, he will make whatever it takes that for Belarus to remain in Russia's orbit. To underscore this point, Putin publicly received Lukashenko in Russia, approved a $1.5 billion loan to ease Belarus's debt burden, and announced that he had set up a certain police reserve that he could deploy if the situation in Belarus gets out of control, without going into details. Still, Moscow's support for Lukashenko is far from unconditional. The Belarusian strongman has been a difficult partner for Moscow, repeatedly discouraging Russia's attempts to tighten economic and political ties. Just before the August 9 election, Lukashenko arrested more than 30 Russian mercenaries employed by the private military company close to the Kremlin on charges of planning a coup. Then he changed his mind quickly and released them once the protests began. The Kremlin might not oppose Lukashenko's eventual departure, given this mixed record of being a difficult partner. It could even facilitate it, as long as Belarus remains firmly within Russia's sphere of influence, and the transition does not appear to be the result of popular or Western pressure. So what is Putin's course of action? As I said earlier, forceful intervention would not seem out of character for the Russian president, but is almost certainly not Putin's preference in Belarus. The Kremlin knows that it had invaded and occupied territory in Georgia and Ukraine previously to prevent those countries from moving geopolitically westward. But the Kremlin also is aware of the fact that in doing so, it planted deep roots of resistance to Russian occupation and intensified popular support for Euro-Atlantic integration, especially among younger Georgians and Ukrainians. Belatedly, Moscow is learning that no amount of disinformation can reverse those trends. Also, the vast majority of Belarusians have made perfectly clear to the Russian president that the longer he backs Lukashenko, the more he risks losing the sympathy of regular Belarusians who have closer ties to Russia than perhaps any other people in today's Europe. For all those reasons, Putin has a different plan in mind for Belarus. Instead of deploying little green men to occupy Belarusian territory, like he did in Ukraine, Moscow is aiming for something called soft annexation. What is soft annexation? It's gradually integrating the Belarusians' economy into Russia's, including the creation of a common currency, followed by political integration through a common foreign and defense policy, and culminating in a full-fledged union state that would mean the de facto absorption of Belarus into Russia. This idea is not new. It had been advocated by Putin almost since the breakup of the Soviet Union in the early 90s. But only, as I just mentioned earlier, only half wholeheartedly supported by Lukashenko. In the past couple of years, however, Putin has been applying increased pressure on the Belarusian side to submit to this plan by emphasizing its economic advantages for Belarus. Here is one example. Russia has long provided Belarus with large subsidies on oil exports. So to make his point and to put pressure on Belarus, Putin withheld them, these supplies, in the hope of pummeling the Belarusian economy into submission. Among other petty tactics, he also has placed restrictions of Belarusians' agricultural exports to Russia. Now, under the cover of the current political crisis, Moscow is sending so-called political technologists to Belarus, in addition to covert intelligence officers, cyber operatives, media consultants, and security advisors, tasked with laying the groundwork for a soft annexation. So you must be wondering what all these people do in Belarus. For instance, the political so-called technologists seek to sow discord within the protest movement between Eastern and Western Belarus, between blue-collar workers and intelligentsia, and Catholics and Orthodox Christians. The Russian TV anchors parachuted in from Moscow are trying to convince the Belarusians that their national awakening is nothing but a foreign plot, and so forth. So far, those tactics have failed. In the meantime, Lukashenko and Putin must defuse the current crisis. Lukashenko most likely will ramp up repression against the leader of the protest movement in the weeks ahead, with help from the Russian experts whom I mentioned behind the scene. At the same time, he publicly expressed the willingness to dialogue with high-profile politicians, favorable, however, to promoting strong relations with the Kremlin, as well as with students and labor unions. But he totally ruled out any contact or any possibility of contact with leaders of the opposition. As if on cue, Putin confirmed to his media that Lukashenko was open to the possibility of constitutional reform and new elections, both parliamentary and presidential, based on a new consultation. The parallel message from Moscow and from Minsk is clear. Constitutional changes and new elections are coming, but on Moscow's terms. And this is how. The proposed constitutional changes would pave the way for greater economic integration with Russia, but they are likely to be presented as a loosening of Lukashenko's dictatorship. For instance, an expanded role for parliament that Putin advocates would ostensibly give power to the people, but in practice would only enable Belarusian parties backed by Kremlin to exert greater influence. Similarly, the promise of new elections might seem to be a concession to the protest movement, but for Moscow, it would buy time to vet Kremlin-friendly candidates to stand for office in case Lukashenko has to go. Now, given the vulnerability of Belarus's opposition and Russia's need to keep the country in its orbit, countries like France, Germany, and the United States will have to walk a political tightrope. They need to pressure the Belarusian government to stop the violence and negotiate a peaceful end to the unrest, even imposing economic sanctions if necessary. But at the same time, they must avoid an open conflict with Moscow. On the one hand, the West has to understand that the Belarusian opposition is invested in domestic issues, such as new elections, an immediate end to terror and repression, the lifting of restrictions on the media, and the release of political prisoners. Not on geopolitics like in Ukraine next door. On the other hand, the protesters in Belarus understand that Moscow is economically and politically central to their country, which depends on Russia as both a market for goods and a supplier of vital resources, such as energy. And they do not want to become a pawn in anyone's anti-Russian struggle. So how can the Western leaders conduct a policy that would recognize the Belarusians' opposition's anger at the status quo while reducing the risk of a large-scale Russian intervention that would close the path to reform for a foreseeable future? Well, probably first by actively seeking a patient, quiet diplomatic engagement with Moscow. Because at the end of the day, the Kremlin still holds the key to Lukashenko's fate. They should offer sanctions relief to Russia in return for a settlement that puts an end to human rights violation in Belarus and advances political accountability. Such offer would have the merit of enabling the West to play a larger economic role and helping create an opening for democratic progress without inflaming Russian fears of a Western power grab. And second, by engaging Belarus directly and not imagine they can do so merely through the Kremlin. Indeed, today's protest movement has given birth to a new consciousness that both mobilizes and unites Belarusians. Much like, if you will, the Polish solidarity movement that was born 40 years ago in the shipyards of Gdansk, bringing together blue-collar workers and intellectuals, urban and rural communities, and remarkably, even some members of the ruling circles. Belarusian citizens need to understand that they are the ones shaping their future and that the West will support economically and diplomatically the sovereign right to express their demands. How this support can be best expressed has been a subject of recent discussions, even in the US Senate. Indeed, when the current crisis broke out in August, the Senate was in the process of confirming a new American ambassador to Belarus. Some senators at the time argued that filling the position under the current conditions would in a way legitimize Lukashenko's regime. But leaving the post empty sends a far worse signal to Belarusian society. Signal that the United States is interested in discussing the country's fate only with Moscow. A post-Belarus with close ties to Moscow, but an improved relationship with the West remains a possible medium-term outcome of the current crisis. It might not be the one many in the West hope for, but it is still a good alternative and perhaps the best option in the current climate. the Western leaders can begin by making clear to everyone, including the Belarusian government and the opposition, as well as Moscow, that their absolute priority is to prevent any further violence, no matter how the domestic political situation evolves. A well-crafted policy can make it a reality. If, however, the West tries to force an aggressive solution, the outcome could be disastrous, most of all for the brave people of Belarus, who really want peace and quiet after all these years of unrest and ordeal. So this is where we are standing today on Belarus, and probably we might have some, most likely, we'll have some new developments by the time we get together again in end of January. So the floor is open. Michel, you can remove now, thank you, the map. From Judy, article in today's paper comparing Europe to US schools, Trump, so to speak, bars and restaurants in Europe. I haven't read it yet myself, like Cynthia, I haven't seen it yet, so I cannot comment on it really. From Sue, was the 1994 war basically over territory? Yes. As I mentioned earlier, Nagorno-Karabakh has always been part of Azerbaijan. It's a landlocked small territory. It was been part of Azerbaijan, but with a majority of Armenian people living there. So the war was because Azerbaijan wanted to take back its territory. At the time, Armenia's army was better. So not only they took over Nagorno-Karabakh proper and all those areas that you saw on the map in yellow, but they sent in some Armenian settlers to Nagorno-Karabakh who had not been there before. So yes, it was basically over. And ever since the end of the war, we're talking about 1994, there have been a couple of flare-ups, as you know, in the meantime. But I remember from the debates in the United Nations that for some 26 years since the end, the war ended, Azerbaijan had never, officially at least, given up on Nagorno-Karabakh, and with its wealth of oil, could set up an army and buy military equipment from Turkey, from Israel, particularly much more modern and than the one that Armenia has, and won the war this time. So now you opening with your question, you opening a new chapter, so to speak. What will be Armenia's position now from now on? I don't know. That remains to be seen. For the time being, the Prime Minister of Armenia explained that he had to sign this ceasefire because there was no choice. and he implied that had not signed the ceasefire, there were chances for Azerbaijan to go into Armenian territory again, proper. So in order to avoid it, and Putin didn't want that either. He wanted to keep Armenia as a way. It was before. He didn't want Azerbaijan to destabilize the whole region. So this is where we stand today. Yes, I guess it was over territory. So I see an area on the map on the Baltic Sea labeled Russia. Yes, it's a small area that was kept by Russia. It's called Kaliningrad. Russia, it's a very important strategic area. So for the Russians, they have a naval. It's their naval port, including military, on the Baltic Sea. It's a piece that used to be Polish, and after the war, Stalin kept Kaliningrad. So in order to reach Kaliningrad, you have to go through the Baltic states or Poland, but this is part of Russia, of Russian territory, yes. From Barbara Miller, I understand Russia gained a lot of new territory in Armenia. Russia? No, Russia was not a party to this war. And I don't understand what you mean by new territory in Armenia. Russia, as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, I think, Russia had a very good relations with Armenia and actually has a military base in Armenia with 5,000 soldiers there. But I don't understand what you mean by gained a lot of new territory in Armenia. Not to my knowledge. From Tom, this little isolated portion of Russia reminds me of East Russia since circa 1930. Wonder if Putin could use it as a similar fashion to partially destabilize the region. I don't know if he's trying to destabilize the region, Tom, but he's using it to keep an eye on the military activities in the Scandinavian state, in the Baltic states, and generally speaking, in the Baltic Sea. So it is very important to the Russians. Now, destabilizing the region, I don't know, but definitely Kaliningrad puts pressure with all the military equipment that the Russians put in there, puts pressure on the Baltic states and on Poland. From Jack, thank you for your information and helpful summary of the current. And in Belarus, I especially appreciate your thoughts about how the West should approach Belarus now. Thank you, Jack. I do not believe what I'm trying to make as clear as possible is that actually the West has very little room to do anything concretely in Belarus. They very well know that the Belarusian society would be opposed to any forceful intervention, not to mention Putin, and would not allow it. And also, when you look at the map, obviously the West, but I don't think the West wants to do anything crazy in Belarus, where once again, the opposition movement is very different from what we saw in the Ukraine. In the Ukraine, there was really a move to join the European Union and to join, particularly for the Russians, that was important, to join NATO. And that the Russians did not want to have a NATO member state on their borders. That was clear from the very beginning, that the government in Kiev was an anti-Russian government. Well, this is not the case, and this would not be the case in Belarus. This movement, opposition movement, is not against Russia. This opposition movement is domestic. It's against the government in Minsk. And I do believe that a changing government and the instauration of some political reforms and economic reforms would go a long way in pacifying the opposition movement, which, again, is not particularly strong. It's strong when it comes to Lukashenko and the fact that they had enough of 26 years of him in power, but not necessarily of turning Belarus into a NATO member state or joining the West against Russia. So their possibilities, their options are limited. Basically, they are economic, but then they have to have the agreement of Russia. That's what I mentioned, that economically speaking, they could lift some sanctions against Russia in exchange for Russia allowing a sort of democratic transition of power in Belarus and Lukashenko's departure. That I can see, but there are no other options for the West to do anything there to turn the situation upside down, to turn it around. What else? Now, if you have questions which do not necessarily relate to the situation in Belarus, by all means. A couple of from Tom. With a new administration likely in Washington come January, which would in all probability take a more supportive position of the Belarus opposition, does this put Putin under pressure to act in Belarus before a new American president is sworn in? That's a very good question. Once again, I don't know how much pressure and how efficiently this pressure can be put on Putin to do something to act in Belarus. If a Biden administration takes over in January, I don't know what tools Biden might have that Trump did not to put pressure on Russia. I do agree with you that in all probability, the issue of human rights will be probably put forward by the Biden administration as opposed to Trump's. But aside from them, concretely, I don't know exactly how a Biden administration would be more efficiently, could be acting more efficiently in Belarus than, or helping the Belarusians' opposition more than what the current administration has done. That being said, I don't rule out that indeed Putin might think that maybe getting rid of Lukashenko before January 20th might help. Although knowing the Russians' way of thinking, I don't think it will make so much of a difference whether you have a Republican or Democratic administration in Washington when it comes to Belarus. From Jack, is today's class the last of the fall session? No, Jack, we have exceptionally, we have another class next Monday on the 23rd, which will be again, that will be the last class, mostly on the elections. But this time, I'll try to be a little more specific on what a Biden administration would do. I was hoping that by next week, we have not a clear, but an official winner. But from the developments that I can see now, this might go on for a little longer. However, I'll take my chances, and from what we heard and seen on Biden's intentions, we might draw a few conclusions. Also, we have to be very careful because, again, between what you say where you're in the opposition and what you do once you're in office, there is a huge, like every time, huge difference. But no, this is not the last class today. We have the pleasure of getting together next Monday also. From Judy, the New York Times today reports that the Armenians who are leaving the disputed territory are burning down their houses. Where are they going? Where are they going exactly? They're going back to Armenia. They're going back to Armenia. And yes, I saw something to that effect. They are burning down houses, so that they are burning down everything that can be burned down, not to leave anything to the Azerbaijanis coming in, and making for the Azerbaijanis more difficult to settle. But yes, I saw that. But they are going back to Azerbaijan. I think I made myself clear, Judy. You have Nagorno-Karabakh, which was occupied by and controlled, administered by Armenia, and you have Armenia proper. This is the Armenian state. So Nagorno-Karabakh was never annexed by Armenia, was an independent territory. Armenia did not annex Nagorno-Karabakh because they didn't want to create a problem with Azerbaijan. And because the international community has never recognized Armenia's control over Nagorno-Karabakh. Nagorno-Karabakh was always considered in international law as part of Azerbaijan, but with an Armenian population. So what the Armenians live there, most of them have already fled, actually. There are very few Armenians who are left in Nagorno-Karabakh. Even in the areas which are still retained, as I mentioned to you, there are areas in Nagorno-Karabakh which remain under Armenia's control. But those territories even have been bombed by Azerbaijan. So most of the Armenians there are only 150,000 people in that area. So most of them will be going back to Armenia proper. You're welcome, Jack. From Barbara to everyone, can you comment on the current situation in Israel with the annexing of Palestinian areas? What do you think the new administration's policy will be towards Israel? Also, now we're getting into my next week's subject. All right, we'll give you a preview of the next week's subject. Definitely, I think that question put to me last week, it seems to me, what the new administration position will be towards the annexation of settlements on the West Bank. And I think I mentioned that also last week, that if you remember, Obama's last move on the settlement had been an abstention by the United States at the Security Council in December of 2016. So with 1 month to go. And when I say Obama administration, that Biden's administration, when for the first time ever, the United States has abstained in the Security Council on a resolution condemning Israel for the new settlements on the West Bank. So the resolution was adopted, since most of the other permanent members of the Security Council voted in favor, or at least nobody, I think the other four voted in favor. And with the United States abstaining, the resolution was adopted. So yes, there will be more, needless to say, there will be more emphasis in a new Biden administration on the fact that the Israel has to stop creating a fait accompli on the West Bank, because eventually the West Bank would be part of a Palestinian state in the framework of the two-state solution that the United States has traditionally been following since 1967. So it will be quite different from the position, on paper anyway, it will be quite different. Now, as you know, there was no annexation by Israel of, 30% of the West Bank, as they were supposed to be doing it, in exchange of the recognition by the Arab Emirates and Bahrain. So in practice, there will be no difference, except that the official line of the new administration will be to be a little more forceful, if you will, publicly, and to call out Israel on any attempt to annex or to build new constructions in the settlements. Because once again, most of this West Bank, Western West Bank, would someday become, after direct negotiations, which I don't see yet, would direct negotiation between the Palestinians and the Israelis. But also, as I said to you last week, I do not believe that this is the first priority for the Biden administration. There are many other issues, particularly domestic, that will come into play before the Biden administration addresses the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Especially, it all depends, and again, we'll have a clearer picture at the end of January. It all depends of who's taking control of the Senate. That's extremely important. A Republican-controlled Senate will definitely stymie any attempt by Biden to change the U.S. policy towards this issue. Again, at least for the next couple of years when we have midterm elections. So this is an issue which will be left up to domestic developments to unfold. From Linda, next week, can you address France's Muslim position as other key EU countries? I'd love to, Linda, if we have any time left, okay? Because again, next week will be all US presidential election all the time. This is why we kept this particular, and we are given this particular opportunity to look back on the American presidential election. So that I'll address mostly that issue. This being said, if you could put pressure on Mill for us to continue having a couple of meetings in the future. I know Michel will be delighted to address other issues, because we're running out of time. So it would be nice, but I'll do my best. Okay, what I can promise you that you can, if you come up with this question next week during our exchange after my presentation, which will be exclusively on the US election, you obviously, during the hour or whatever time we have left for our exchange, for our chat, you can ask me the same question, and we'll discuss it. I think I know why you're asking me to address the French Muslim position. That will take a little longer than just a few words. So I'll promise to answer these questions relatively to summarize this question for you next week. Anything else? Anybody left? Oh, there's still around 40 people left. So please. From Tom. Once sworn in, can Biden immediately re-enter into the WHO? The US has shown no leadership at home or abroad in dealing with a pandemic. Hopefully, the new administration can both address the outbreak here in the US and also organize some worldwide effort to work together in dealing with this disaster. Yes, I think that by he can immediately, like with the Paris Climate Accord, these two treaties, if you will. One is the US being part of WHO, and the other one is US having signed the treaty. They can be re-entered immediately, only because none of these two were ratified by the Senate. It was an executive order, if I'm not mistaken, by Trump to withdraw from WHO and to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. So again, the advantage of an executive order is that it can enter into force right away. The disadvantage is that the next president can also change this executive order by signing something else. So I believe that, yes, in both cases, the US can return right away to the two agreements. Now, what that will change practically, that remains to be seen. But it's a gesture, okay, to the rest of the international community. Because I like to remind you that in terms of environment, the US has done more probably than most of the countries who are part of the Paris Climate Agreement, except that they have not done it officially within the frame of an international treaty. They have done it privately. And there are a lot of American companies that have been working for the past 2 or 3 years on reducing the emission of carbon into the air, and which have been, some of them have been very successful. So as for the WHO, you might have heard, Tom, this morning that another lab came up with a new vaccine, which apparently is 94% efficient. So we're getting close. And by the time Biden's administration takes over in January, we might very well have a vaccine. So it will be much easier for the United States. And in fact, this vaccine was produced by American companies to organize some kind of distribution of the vaccine worldwide and how to do it. But again, we'll have an answer to that in January. From Larry. Is the UK leaving the EU without an agreement? Yeah, deadlines keep coming and going. You're absolutely right, Larry. And again, I was lamenting by myself this morning that we don't have time to go back into the EU discussions because it's getting very, very close. We are mid-November. For your information, I don't know if you saw that, but all the EU member states are getting together. Now, new negotiations opened this morning in London between the two sides. And on the 19th, today is the 16th, on Thursday, there is a high-level meeting, virtual, online, between all the member states of the EU who are supposed to be looking at a deal that might have been achieved between today and Thursday. So it goes to show how little time there is left for the two parties to come up with an agreement. Now the optimists are again taking over because they point out that in the past week or so, two of the most fervent Brexiteers in Johnson's cabinet have left or have been dismissed, have left. And then maybe it signals a softening of Johnson's position on Brexit. However, Johnson is hiding again because you might have seen also that he was sick with a virus back in May, and apparently he's been in contact with someone who had the virus, and now he's back in confinement. So that also remains to be seen how this is going to impact the discussions which are now held in London. But you're absolutely right. By December 31st, not to mention that every member state's parliament, if there is an agreement, in fact, has to ratify that agreement. This agreement has to be translated into 27 languages, okay? All the languages of the member states. And then it has to go before each parliament, each national parliament of these 27 member states, and ratify. And we have only 6 weeks to go, even less considering that around Christmas time, everything closes down. So maybe 5 before Christmas. The bets are open. They're really running out of time. And it would have been interesting if there is an agreement to be able to look at the agreement in the next couple of weeks or 3 weeks, but I'm afraid this is not going to happen for us because we run out of classes. Claire, is ISIS strong enough to become again a serious threat within our country? If not, what is or might soon become the greatest international threat to the USA? Claire, I see you're anticipating. Yes, ISIS is still a serious threat. Not so much to ISIS hasn't been particularly threatening the United States within the United States. They've been very active outside the United States. But you know what? The ISIS ideology and the ISIS efficiently is still there. You might kill all the leaders of ISIS. You might kill all the leaders of Al Qaeda. But if they are able to, they might disrupt their operations and activities for a little while. But eventually, they can rebuild and act again. The situation, as you could see, is much more threatening to the European countries and to Africa in many ways, and now more and more in Asia than to the United States per se. This is a huge fight by the United States, obviously, particularly against Al Qaeda, because Al Qaeda did what it did. It was a direct hit on the United States on 9/11. But this remains absolutely a threat to US interests or citizens abroad, as well as other Western countries or other countries in Africa and Asia. So yes, this is a long-term fight against an ideology, an anti-Western ideology, not only the United States. It is strong enough. All right, anything else? Okay, well, I guess we're running out of questions. You know everything, at least about Belarus, and at least for 1 week. So we'll then meet. Yeah, let me see. I think there is something else, maybe. No. So, okay. So then let's meet next Monday. Hopefully we have some encouraging developments here on the election front. And okay, well, we'll take it from there. Have a nice week. Keep safe, everybody. Be well. And see you all next week. Thank you, Michelle, if you're still there.
Thank you.
See you next week, Pierre.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Next week.
See you next week.
Bye.
Pierre, did you get my email? I emailed you the, I'm sorry, I emailed it yesterday. I realized I hadn't, the 14th.
That's what I told you at the beginning.
Oh, I came in a couple minutes late. I'm sorry.
No. You spoke to me.
No. Today?
Tom, is that Tom?
Yes.
Yes. I didn't talk to you earlier?
No. Unless
well,
you're
someone replied.
I have a doppelganger out there.
Someone replied. I was absolutely convinced that I talked to you. I told that person, I thanked him, and I told him I received the email. I thought it was you, that I received the email, and that, but I only saw this morning. You sent it to me last night, right?
Yeah, but I should have sent it to you a couple of days ago, but I realized when I was thinking about the thing today, I thought, wait a minute, I never bothered to.
No, I did see it, and maybe we can go through that next week if we have a little time. And Mark says to me, yes, you did talk to Tom or an imposter. Probably.
Imposter. It was- you probably get more common sense from the imposter than you would from me.
No, come on. Thank you for that. I did thank whoever it was.
Yeah, because I
And,
showed up about 5 minutes late today. To the
because
event.
I told that person, I thank you for the email. I saw it last night, but I didn't read it before this morning. And he didn't seem surprised, you know. He said, "Oh, okay." So, someone be careful with your checking account. Okay.
Well, if he ends up getting my checking account, he's going to be the one in trouble, not me. He'll give up.
Well, I saw your comment also that it's very close to what Trump's administration is doing. So we can talk about it a little bit if you have time next week. Again, unfortunately, it's our last class, so that's how it is. All right.
Oh, it sounds good. I'm glad you got it.
Okay, Tom. So see you then. See you next week, and you too, Mark. See you next week.